All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Storytelling to Leverage Nature's Benefits. This is the fourth webinar in the Nature's Benefits Forum series, and we're happy you could join us today. I'm your host, Christiana Teig-Witherell with Willamette Partnership. We're a nonprofit based in Portland, Oregon, and we help build the collaborative spaces and tools that groups need to make better natural resource decisions, laying the groundwork for more effective conservation. The Nature's Benefits Forum webinar series is an online workshop to help Forest Service staff and external partners understand the value that nature's benefits communications can have in connecting forest restoration efforts with people and communities, why that matters, and how to do it. Today's webinar is the fourth and final in our series, and we're going to learn how to tell a story to support forest restoration goals and understand what communications tools and resources are available to help, with Sherry Reckler, Region 5 Ecosystem Services Program Manager, and Nicholas Smith, the Region 6 Regional Partnership Coordinator. Before we get started, I want to say a quick word about the Zoom platform we're using today. Please be sure to keep yourself muted and your camera off during the presentations to minimize distraction. You can ask questions at any time throughout the webinar using the chat feature, and we'll have several opportunities for Q&A today. And with that, I will turn things over to Sherry Reckler. Welcome, Sherry.
Thanks so much, Christiana. And let me share my screen, and hopefully you will see it. Okay, so welcome, folks. And I'm Sherry Reckler, and I am an Ecosystem Services Program Manager in Region 5. I work in the regional office. And we focus on those nature's benefits, those ecosystem services that people feel, hear, see, and rely on in their daily lives. But can we tell a story with them? Can we leverage them to increase investment on Forest Service lands in order to heighten the pace and scale? Can we get people involved in action? So I'm going to go through and talk to you a little bit about storytelling today, and please feel free to use the chat box. So storytelling can be done in many different ways. You know, we can do it orally, we can do it in writing, through pictures, and even we can act it out, okay? But there are several common denominators with regard to storytelling that you really want to focus on. The first thing is, there's a reason you're going to want an audience. What is it that you have to share, okay? What is the message that you have to share? And then who do you want to share it with, and where are they at in terms of their understanding? What do they already know? Meet them where they're at. And then, is there something after you tell the story that you want them to do? You want them to have a message that they take away which causes them to engage in some sort of action. And if you want that to happen, then the question becomes, well, what's the best method of dissemination to create the greatest resonance and action? And I'm just going to hide that bar. Okay. Okay, so in terms of a deeper dive, I was, scrolling through the internet, trolling it, I guess you would say, looking for something exciting to share. And what I found was this deeper dive that Vanessa Boris, who's with the Harvard Business Publishing Group, posted back in December of 2017. And she's a senior manager at the Harvard Business Publishing Corporation for Learning. And so I grabbed a few excerpts, which I thought were terrific kind of key points when thinking about telling a story to whatever audience you're trying to connect with. And so one of the great things about the story, the vehicle itself as a story, is that it can convey culture and history, and it binds people together. It basically can bring communities and families together, and intuitively, these are an important part of the ties that kind of bind us. We find similarities between one another. We're like, hey, we've got something in common. The other piece of this is that good stories, as she writes here, do more than create a sense of connection, okay? People might find themselves in a story and trust the storyteller more because they find themselves in that story. They identify with what that story is sharing. And when you tell a story around numbers and data, it's more likely to resonate with the listener. And I'm going to share some examples of that. But also, and I hadn't thought of it this way until I read the article, but stories are really a surprisingly economical way of conveying complicated ideas. And if you are someone, and I'll get into this in a minute, who's audio focused, this may in fact grab your attention and even make you visualize. So along those lines, we get into the fact that everybody isn't wired the same way in terms of how they learn. And so I identified here that 40% are predominantly visual learners and that do best through videos. 40% are auditory, so they are compelled and captivated by lectures, potentially with, exciting verbiage. And then, of course, you've got the kinesthetic learner, the 20% who learn best by doing, experiencing, or feeling. I actually happen to be one of those people. So whatever type of learner you are, the hope is that somewhere in the story that's being told, you find a connection and something that speaks to you. And then in terms of stories that stick, she cites here a psychologist, Peg Newhouser, and that well-told stories are remembered for long periods of time, and that facts are 20 times more likely to be remembered when they're part of a story. So research at the end, I thought that was a key point, that research confirms that well-designed stories are most effective for exerting influence, okay? So those are some of the key aspects of storytelling, how you want to connect with people. But what's the hook? In other words, how are you going to get their attention? We're inundated by all kinds of medium all day long. And so what will be your hook? How will you draw them into what you're trying to say? So I pulled up a couple of examples. This happens to take place in Ohio, both of these. And, the first one starts talking about the change in, American cities and how they are fitting into highway building, and then it zones into Cleveland and Shaker Heights, which happens to be where my mom was born. And then it talks to the fact that gives you a little bit of background, and then it speaks to the fact that the Nature Center at Shaker Lakes was built to educate future generations. You can use all of that as a hook, or you can use pieces of it, okay, depending upon how much room you have. And if you're precise with your language, you can create that hook with less words. The other example is West Creek. And it starts to draw you in by saying it was conceived when a small group set out to purchase property in Parma, Ohio, with the idea of linking it to a major network of recreational trails. So it's trying to draw you in. And then it says, well, then after years of making deals, the West Creek Conservancy convinced Cleveland Metro Parks to take over the management of 324 acres, and habitat restoration is underway. So again, I think you can take the whole thing as your hook, or you could even more concisely speak to the conception by a small group of this idea, and then go right into how habitat restoration is underway. But the goal here is find that interesting aspect that perhaps folks wouldn't believe could be occurring. So I wanted to share just a few examples, and there's so many other examples of hooks. It's really coming through the backside of a story. How do you back into it? So here's a little cheat sheet that I put together when I think about writing stories. And I have a story map that I've done for Nature's Benefits, and it's on the Region 5 website. If you go to the cloud tag on the front page and hit Nature's Benefits, it'll bring you there. And there's an area where with the help of all 18 national forests, I helped develop stories around Nature's Benefits. And so I had to use many of these techniques. So the cheat sheet I have is, here's the unique thing that happened. That's a hook. Or maybe it's the background. Maybe the background of how you got there. That's the hook. Okay? Or maybe it's even the partners in the funding. I mean, they could be the hook, or your story could go into how it was an unusual event as to how these partners and the funding came together. So then what are the nature's benefits that were restored, maintained, or enhanced by a certain suite of projects on a forest? And here's what we want you, the audience, to do, takeaway message. What's that takeaway message you'd like them to do? So you've brought them in with the hook, you've told them kind of how you got there, you're giving them the who, what, where, when, and how the partners and the funding came together. What were the nature's benefits that were restored from the actual restoration activities? And here's what we want you to do. What's that takeaway message you want to leave them with to compel them into some kind of action? So a few more tips, bringing your story to life. So I spoke about the back door, which is luring them in. And then I don't think I shared this, but is there a way that we can get them invested emotionally, focusing them on the win here? Maybe that's a win-win for everybody. Maybe it's an issue where there's upfront money coming in and there are beneficiaries who are willing to pay back that upfront investor, and it's a win-win for everybody, and the investor gets an interest rate on its return. Discuss the consequences and results of action or inaction. In other words, the trade-offs, making them look at what's at risk. And then I go further into the next bullet talking about obstacles, trade-offs, sharing challenges with the audiences, making them part of the decision. If they understand, hey, this isn't just, for instance, the Forest Service didn't do a good job in this area. Here were the obstacles that they were dealing with, and these were the balances that this was a balancing act, and these were the tough decisions they had to make. And perhaps you were helpful in terms of being part of a scoping process. Maybe on the left side of the NEPA triangle. Maybe think about using a metaphor. Okay. It's really, a metaphor is normally something that's comparative, but using different language to share that. Restoration to reduce risk. A strong ecological restoration as an intervention. Sometimes we think of an intervention as something you might do in a family that's having problems. Healing the landscape. In other words, we use healing to talk about making humans and animals and even plants as being, making them whole in some way. So we're using that metaphor by talking about healing the landscape. And then maybe give it a twist. Is there something in it that was unexpected? Okay, and this is similar to the hook, but you can use the twist further into your story if you have one. Something that was unexpected, that you were doing, restoration work was unfolding when you found this archaeological site that had yet been to be revealed. And then end strong. In order to restore, maintain, and enhance nature's benefits into the future, we need your help too. Okay, so all these projects that we do on National Forest System lands, they all have nature's benefits that people rely on in their daily lives. Many of them have co-benefits at the same time. There's carbon restoration as well as, let's say, water, an increase in water flow. So how can we use the public to assist us? Can they be citizen stewards, better citizen stewards? Can they engage in volunteerism and work with their forests to share some of their time to help us ensure that we have our nature's benefits for future generations? So then we get to the delivery of the nature's benefits message. So we have internals, and obviously we have our external, our public. So this is where you can be really creative. If the issue is that you'd like to be able to share this type of knowledge with internals and have them begin to think of the work they do as potentially a story, a piece of the mosaic of what the forest contributes to surrounding and downstream communities, then perhaps you talk to them about this type of storytelling work at an FLT, brown bag lunches, weekly meetings, maybe even create some type of story competition with a prize. With regard to externals, of course, we are hardwired to provide public meetings and have handouts. it could be a trifold, it could be a one-pager, it could be one-on-ones, it could be something that's mentioned in collaboratives. Perhaps weaving a nature's benefits story into not only a news release, but into a feature article. And then, of course, we've got all our social media. And obviously, the best stories are ones that can also potentially be shared via video. So, and that could be a video project, of which we've had many with regard to restoration projects in Region 5. We've had many videos that Ann and Steve Dunsky from the Public Affairs Shop have done, but we also have some folks, some PAOs out there who have skills right now who can create some, develop some videos on their own. So here's a little bit of a Q&A, a little time frame to ask questions. And so Christiana, I'm going to hand it over to you to see if there's anything in the chat box or if anybody would like to turn off their microphone and ask a question directly.
We have nothing yet, but as soon as we do, I will let you know. We'll just pause here for a second to give folks a chance to formulate their questions.
We'd also love it if you wanted to share something that's worked for you as well that might not have been mentioned.
Can you describe a success story?
Yeah, I mean, I think a really good one was, and I can't remember exactly all of the details of it, but this one was a really interesting Nature's Benefits story. It I believe, took place on the Inyo National Forest, and there was an area that was designated a national recreation area with Jeffrey pines, and those pines attracted these Piaget caterpillars. And there was a benefit to local tribes because they still harvested those caterpillars for food. So you have a direct connection to people, which is what nature's benefits are, and that reliance on that food source, which wouldn't be in existence if our forest wasn't there and if the attraction of these caterpillars to Jeffrey pines didn't exist.
Sherry, do you have another example other than the U.S. Forest Service, a success story of nature's benefits that addresses multiple benefits?
It's not the U.S. Forest Service. Well, unfortunately, one's not coming to my mind immediately. I'm thinking of a great recreational benefit access to people. It actually took place on the Wayne National, is taking place on the Wayne National Forest, and has to do with a trail that's being developed, and the benefits from that trail and that recreation on that forest is enticing to over 250,000 people in the area. And the income that will come from the visitation is millions. So just trying to think of something that's not Forest Service off the top of my head in terms of storytelling. I don't know if Nicolette, can you think of anything if you're listening in?
Yes, so I think our partners can really help us tell those stories. So as we're encouraged to think more and more about cross-boundary restoration, I think the organizations that we work with can help us celebrate how restoration of the national forest can be really relevant to downstream users. So I'm thinking about like Tracy, even conversations you and I have had about stormwater management in the greater Seattle area, and how we can really highlight the connection between the condition of the national forest and the function of the national forest and how the city of Seattle is dealing with its stormwater. So I think other entities can really help us think about those multi-benefit stories as well.
And actually, thank you, Nicola, very much. And actually, along the same lines, there is something that we are looking into in terms of sustainable recreation on the Lake Tahoe Basin Management Unit. And while that is Forest Service, we are looking at how we can accrue more benefits from essentially assimilating our needs into the greater Corridor 89, the regional Corridor 89 around Lake Tahoe. So by kind of stacking benefits, we might be able to actually increase the benefits that people enjoy. So sometimes we're finding ourselves nesting our work within larger non-Forest Service efforts.
Thank you. Next question. A lot of times the ask for the public may be just for them to support the project, not necessarily to volunteer or physically do anything. How do you think about storytelling for this situation?
So I guess I need a little bit of a clarification, just in turn, and maybe you want to unmute and give us a little bit more background.
Eileen, do you want to unmute yourself?
Sure. I was just thinking in context of like NEPA documents or project proposals that maybe our unit doesn't have the capacity at this time to accept any volunteer work or that sort of thing. And so how do you tell a story around really just looking for someone's support rather than opposition or neutrality on a project?
Yeah, it depends upon if you want them to, and you know, the Forest Service can't lobby legislators, but the way that, you know, it is certainly possible for our public to lobby their state and U.S. Congressional delegations. And so it might be, it might be something where you could craft a story and ask them to support that effort through their local government, or it's careful. You have to be careful how you word it, but I would say that you can encourage them to ask that the description of the work and storytelling about a particular project be offered at public locations, and to urge them to urge their local, I guess you could say local governments and local chambers to be able to share this information. It's an education mission to a great extent. With at some point, once folks are have reached, we hope there's a critical mass where folks actually reach some level of saturation with the message in order to have them act in some way. But they can, I'm just thinking in my mind, people who are opinion leaders in the community have great bully pulpits, so to speak, to talk about the wonderful efforts that the forests are engaging in. So I hope that helps. Did that answer your question to some, or give you at least an example?
Yes, thank you.
Super.
Great. How can U.S. Forest Service staff pursue creating videos about projects or nature's benefits messages?
So there are some folks, some PAOs in the region who have this skill, and he might not be on the phone, but I know Joe Flannery on the Tahoe National Forest has that skill. You might be able to tap into some folks who are in your zone. I do also know that Steve Dunsky in Public Affairs and Communications can give you some tips, and also some tips about who to contact if you have a little money for the contracting, depending upon the size of the effort and you know, what the level of visibility of it will be, and what your dissemination of this might be. He can give you some pointers.
Great. Okay, that's all the questions we have right now. Maybe we can move on and ask people to keep popping those questions into the chat box, and we'll have another Q&A break in a little bit.
Super. Thank you. So I wanted to give you some examples of nature's benefits that have been delivered in communications. And so I don't know if most folks have seen these or not yet, although we've now been using them for several years. But my colleague in Ecosystem Services and I put together these infographics, and basically we're telling a story around numbers. And we're also providing equivalencies. Like if you look at the water infographic, we're trying to make this story resonate with people by sharing with them, what does 11 trillion gallons of water look like? Okay, approximately equal to 17 million Olympic-sized swimming pools. So providing those equivalencies is helpful. Also with the water one, and I won't spend too much time on these, but because you can always find them on the Nature's Benefits website or contact me. We also provide, in terms of, in California, water is priced differently depending upon where you are and what you're doing with it. And so you can see below that the wholesale market price is $3.2 billion, but the cost of water for a 4-person home in Los Angeles using about 100 gallons a day is $367 billion. And then at the spigot for farmers, it's 583 million. So so I think what we've gotten so far in terms of the feedback on these are that the graphics are great and the equivalencies are great, and that we focused on information people find interesting. So we have them, I'll just share with you, for recreation, water, timber and wood products, meadow restoration, local economies, and then the health and the proximity of national forests to and the health connection, and access to forests and that health connection. So we have about 6 or 7, and again they're in the same location. So, and I'll give you citations to where we found all of this stuff in a few moments. So those were what we call regional infographics. They were a roundup of regional key nature's benefits: carbon, water, local economies, timber, wood products, as I said, meadows, health and wellness. Then what we also did is we created individual forest fact sheets for our 18 national forests, with the hope of being able to update them in some consistent real time. And so basically we've taken what was at a regional level and condensed it down into individual fact sheets. And I think I just show you the first couple of pages for each one. I'm gonna go back for a second here. I believe some of them have a 3rd page, but as you can see, we've condensed down water, carbon, recreation, and we have habitat in here too, for each of our 18 national forests in Region 5. And Region 6 has done something similar, and so I'm going to let Nicola chime in.
Hey everybody. So my name is Nicola Smith. I am the Regional Partnership Coordinator for Region 6 based in Portland. And I've really benefited from learning from the innovation that Sherry's mentioned and the great leadership that she and her colleagues have demonstrated in telling these stories. And so Sherry and her colleague basically trained me in how they both accessed Forest Service data and analyzed Forest Service data to create the infographics that she mentioned. And what you're seeing here is an example of how their work inspired us to tailor a product specific to Region 6, and I really want to credit Dara Isaacson, our visual information specialist, and Stephen Baker and our communication staff to re-envision what this might look like for our region. And if you can go to the next slide, please, Sherry or Christiana. So in addition to that data, also telling stories about the economic contributions of recreation to our various constituencies, and using a narrative on the right bar to, both in visual terms, statistical terms, and narrative terms, highlighting the importance of recreation. So we're hoping to create these kind of parallel products inspired by Region 5's work, and the next one we're working on is the importance of water provided by the National Forest in Region 6. And next slide. And so, and you can, I think this is animated, you can go ahead and advance. Thank you, Sherry. So also just wanted to provide examples of other kinds of partnerships and collaborations that can help us tell these stories. So the region has been working with the Ecosystem Workforce Program at the University of Oregon for several years, again, to take Forest Service data, but analyze it and present it in ways that can be a little more compelling and accessible to diverse audiences. So the website I have here, and I'll include a link in the chat box in a moment, includes their products from kind of 3 phases, thinking about, you know, the role that national forests play in communities, the role of forest products, as well as partnerships and restoration, in state-by-state presentations. So wanted to share, you know, diverse ways that we can use our information both internally and with partners to tell these stories. And we were planning to do a webinar series on the products that you see here, and that was paused by COVID-19. But for those of you on the line in Region 6, we're planning to formally launch these soon.
Which absolutely look terrific. So these are, thanks, Nicola. So what we've put together, Nicola and I put together basically, do we have yours in here, Nicola? Oops, sorry, let me go back. In terms of, no, I don't think we, yes.
Oh, the University of Oregon example, I'll include that in the chat. Thanks, Sherry.
Okay, super. Yeah, so basically here are the citations for where we got information for the infographics and fact sheets, and for the most part, it's Forest Service information, but there are some other sites that we used as well. And so this will be available. Christiana will make this PowerPoint available. And so this is I decided I wanted like a one-stop shop. So I created this story map. And I won't tell you that a story map is easy. It's not easy to input and update. It's kind of a kludgy effort. But, and for some reason right now, whoops, let me go back. I guess I just have a picture here, but basically it was my one-stop shop. So you can scroll down and learn about nature's benefits. Also, if you click on any of the forests, it will take you to their forest fact sheet, and also to a map of where the forest is located. And of course, I could have added a bunch of different layers if I were a pro in mapping, but I just wanted to map out where the project took place on the forest. And then also, this is a Nature's Benefits video. It's an animation, and it's really cute. I think it's only about a minute and a half or so. So also, all of this is on the R5 Nature's Benefits webpage. So this is what I call a Nature's Benefits email blast. So this is something I worked on with Paul Wade from Public Affairs and Communications. And basically, we got into this kind of sequence of every time I had several stories that I had written with the help of the forest that leveraged nature's benefits in them, I would send out a Nature's Benefits email blast. And so that's what this is, okay? Then, of course, we have Twitter, and we have our hashtag is Nature Benefits Lives. And so we worked out a bit of a Twitter schedule because the region doesn't have, at the regional level, Facebook. However, we did, I believe Paul did send some prefabbed posts for Facebook to the individual forests when there was a story that they had helped develop. So then we have the region's R5 snapshot. So this is effectively a newsletter. And so I was able to highlight in every R5 snapshot, which comes out monthly, something about nature's benefits. So yet another form of communication. So that's what these are. Now this one's interesting. The Inyo National Forest was presenting before the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. And so they came up with, and it doesn't show up very well, I believe it's like a front and back. It's either a 2 or 3 pager, where they're telling their own story, okay, and pretty much emulating, modeling the infographics that we had developed, but doing it for a story they want to tell. And as a result of it, this is still a part of it, this next slide, as a result of this presentation, they actually received $3 million from the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. So I don't know, I was talking to Nora Gamino, and she's on the Inyo National Forest. She's an engineer there, and she's actually working on a conservation finance project that focuses on sustainable recreation. And I believe she was part of this presentation and she developed this. So if you're interested in getting some tips, I'm sure she wouldn't mind sharing. Again, her name is Nora Gamino. And then when I worked in the public affairs and communications shop, I was developing a communications plan with the Sierra Nevada Conservancy for their watershed improvement project. And this was a social media and email post that we were pushing out, trying to show the trade-off, meaning a little fire now with a prescribed burn in the left-hand side picture, or a lot of fire later, which of course equates to a lot more emissions as well. Additionally, another one we do is we're talking about animals and habitat, and the title is "It's Their Forest Too, Which Would They Choose?" And of course, you're seeing what looks like a healthy fox, and then you see a severely burned area. Oops. I don't know. Okay, and then the last slide, I believe this might be my last one, is again along when I was working with the Sierra Nevada Conservancy on the watershed improvement project, we were able to get Jim Brannon, who was the former Sierra Nevada Conservancy president, and Don Yasuda, one of our scientists from the Forest Service, on a Capitol Public Radio program. Always challenging, okay? It was a nice coup to be able to have them be able to discuss the watershed improvement project. And so I have actually that radio snippet if anybody's interested. And so with that, I think that that's the end of my slide deck, but I'm certainly open for questions.
Great, thank you, Sherry. We'll get some questions going here. I actually had a question. The email blasts that you mentioned, are those to internal Forest Service staff? Who receives those emails and
internal and external?
And external. What kind of externals receive those emails?
So we look for, first of all, we make sure that we put as many hashtags in there as we can to identify those entities that would have an interest in what we've written, and will then of course retweet. But it's a lot of stakeholders, it's a lot of partners, and then it's the general public. So it's a whole crew. And of course, with social media, you have to remember you have analytics, which tell you how many opens you have, how many views, and so that you can maybe retarget. But we sent it out very broadly, and also would send out messaging through email. And to internals, you saw those products that were created that were the R5 snapshot, which continues to this day, as well as the Nature's Benefits e-bulletins, which I do send out with the help of Paul Wade periodically to catch internals. And so we try to work it both ways.
Great. And the fact sheets for the individual forests that you've done, do you have a story about how the forests are using those, maybe with their stakeholders and external partners?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, initially, I think when we were developing them, and that was my colleague and I, Jason Coe, we were thinking about district ranger stations, visitor centers. We were thinking about those folks from the forest who are engaging in partners on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. So we were thinking that would probably be the distribution. And yet every so often I'm finding in conversation, someone comes up in a completely different circle saying, hey, I saw these and it's really helpful. We know, and this is just something to put into your minds about how we can leverage these nature's benefits, we can leverage this information, is that it's helpful when our forests are applying for grants to share what the benefits would be from the project that they're applying the grant for. We know for conservation finance that potential beneficiaries as well as investors, lender investors who would provide, let's say, money up front for a project to be paid back later, they may be interested in what the benefits would be from the project. So the storytelling has the ability to bring resources to our forests and potentially help us kind of heighten the pace and scale of what we can do in terms of restoration. And Nicola is a partnership coordinator on Region 6. So Nicola, did you want to add anything to that?
Sure. Yeah, I would say that, it's interesting because the Forest Service is in a mode right now of really encouraging partnership and collaboration. And I think it really benefits us to think about how we can reach different kinds of audiences, as Sherry was saying. So there's a great diversity in the ways that people either connect to or rely on public lands. So the more that we can leverage the information that we do have, and I know that many of us in the agency, see the limits of our current performance measures, which are mostly around, our target accomplishments, particularly right now with regard to forest products and fuels reduction. But we know that people care about a lot more than just those benefits. So the more that we can, work with the research stations, university partners, and our communication specialists to help build those bridges through information, the better. I think that can really benefit our partnership work.
Thanks, Nicola. And I would add that I really kind of feel like this is like a weapon in our toolbox. In other words, if we can pull together these benefits, it really can tell a very impactful story, and it can cause people to act. And I think that it's perfect to share with legislators of all levels, local, state, and federal. And I do know this, that our regional foresters team uses this information, those infographics that we developed, all the time. And I do know for a potential corporate partnership that I've been serving as a liaison and helping to connect with one of our forests that they used in initially, speaking to this partner, much of what was included in their forest fact sheet. So, so hopefully that gives you ideas.
Great. And it seems like the fact sheets, the infographics, you mentioned videos, those are pretty heavy lifts in terms of creating content. Is there maybe a first step, a smaller size bite that folks can take to kind of get into storytelling if they don't have the resources, the money on hand to be able to do some of those bigger lifts like videos or infographics?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say this. First of all, there's only one regional graphics designer in our region, and he's super busy. And so being able, I mean, even I have to get into a queue, and it takes a very long time to finish these infographics and fact sheets. It is a bit of a heavy lift. What I would say is that you could do something even with PowerPoint in terms of telling a story about a project on your forest, okay? So you can, there's, some of you might be well-educated in design, publishing, and then there's always PowerPoint. So what I would say is look at what your immediate need is, okay? And then try to find some of these facts, potentially a couple of these facts, not all of them, as a hook. So that's what I would do. In other words, I would say, okay, there's a project that's ongoing on our forest that's going to occur. NEPA has just been completed. Really want to get folks' attention, bring more beneficiaries who might be able to pay for the benefits that come from this forest to the table. Maybe it's about telling that local story, finding a few key facts that are interesting and compelling and weaving them in. or just, looking at that citation sheet that we have that I had included and seeing, is there some aspect, let's say it's more of a recreation project. So maybe looking at some of those recreation numbers would be enough to, kickstart an exciting story.
Great. Folks, keep typing your questions into the chat box. Looks like we had a few questions about some of the resources that were shared. Nicola has provided a few links. We'll also be posting a recording of this webinar and Sherry's PowerPoint up on our website. We'll get that link to you in just a bit here. Are there more questions for Sherry or Nicola?
Christina, what I might add is, as you can all see, Region 6 is inspired by, but hasn't quite yet caught up to, the tremendous wealth of resources that Region 5 has developed. And so one initial purpose of this webinar series was to both share that information and open the door to Region 6 National Forest or partners that would like to do more of this work, and we're fortunate to continue a collaboration with the Willamette Partnership to help us with implementation, tailoring some products to specific, Region 6 geographies. And so I wanted to share that I plan to spend some focused time doing that after this webinar series. I have already been approached by some national forests that would really like to create their own communication tools and highlight the benefits that they provide. So wanted to make sure that that's clear to folks that at least in Region 6, we definitely see a follow-on from this series to build on the momentum that Region 5 has helped create.
And I'm so glad you mentioned that, Nicola, because Nicola and I have developed a Nature's Benefits All Regions Community of Practice, and we just started this. And we're going to have our second one. It's going to be quarterly because that's what we heard from the first group, that they thought quarterly was appropriate. So the next one is on June 29th, and you can email myself or Nicola if you haven't received an invite. We were trying to get most regions involved. And I think, Nicola, you said we pretty well had all regions except for just a couple. And what we're really looking to do is we're going to have speakers, okay? But we also want to have some of the folks who are in the audience speak and share how they might be leveraging Nature's Benefits, or ask questions about, where they can find resources, or perhaps they have some resources that, Region 5 and Region 6 don't know about. We don't know necessarily what all the other regions are doing in this area of integrating Nature's Benefits into policy making and into decisions in the field, et cetera. So join us. So the next one again is June 29th, and then the next one after that, we already have speakers lined up. The next one is September 29th. So that invite, the latter one has not gone out yet, but the former one has, and if you haven't received it, let us know.
Great, thank you, Sherry and Nicola. Do you have any last thoughts to share? I don't see any more questions coming in.
So I guess what I would say is that, and this is what I would share when I worked in public affairs and communications, that we don't tell enough of our good stories, and boy, do we have them. And I say that because, I worked with the forest to write, more than 20 stories. Even though we have 18 forests, some of them had 2 stories that they wanted to get out there. So put your hat on. In other words, I know time is limited, capacity is limited. So think about whether or not developing some type of story could leverage something that you need to do. And then try and kill a couple of birds with one stone.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, Sherry.
Thanks, Christiana.
Yeah. So this was the 4th and final webinar in our Nature's Benefits Forum series. We've had one a week during the month of May. If you missed one or you'd like to share it with a colleague, you can visit willamettepartnership.org/naturesbenefits, where you'll find a recording of each session and all the PowerPoint slides from our presenters. If there's any other resources that they'd like to share, we'll make sure to get those up on the website as well. So I just want to say thank you so much to Sherry and Nicola and to each of you for being here today on behalf of the Nature's Benefits Forum Planning Team. We hope this webinar series will help you incorporate Nature's Benefits communications into your work for stronger partnerships and lasting investments in our national forests. I'm Christiana Teig-Witherell from Willamette Partnership, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Thank you.